On that. Let me just start off with a simple question. What was the racial makeup of the majority of the plaintiffs? Were most of the people that you were dealing with as plaintiffs and as the characters in your story, Corban, were they mostly Black and brown folk?
Oh, no. So we filed 26 lawsuits for 26 communities in 5 counties. Like in Duplin County, you have 35 hogs per person, 2 million hogs, just hogs everywhere. Of our 525 plaintiffs in the 26 communities, I had less than maybe 5 that were not people of color. So it was so obvious. Interestingly, we never mentioned the word race, racial injustice in our 5 federal trials, but it was beyond obvious. There would be, if you walked into those federal courthouses in that courtroom, you would see Mona Lisa Wallace, Mike Keskey, and our very small group of lawyers and advocates on one side with a few people of color and environmentalists, and then on the other, you would see virtually powerful, industrial, almost all no minorities on the other side. So I think it was obvious to the juries without us having to say that. I want to say one thing interesting. In our second trial, we challenged something that Blacks, a particular person of color, an African-American, was being excluded unreasonably from the jury. It's called a Batson challenge. And I'd rarely ever seen that done, but the court did seat that particular juror. So I think the race issue was very obvious, and that the fact that these people were primarily minorities and communities, by the way, sir, that had their churches right there, and in some communities, their burial grounds. I do want to say one thing. I was thinking about it when Corban was talking. Our federal lawsuits were not against the farmers. We were very sympathetic to them throughout and still are. We only sued, in our case, Murphy Brown or Smithville, because they were Smithville's hogs, Smithville's rules, Smithville's procedures. And, you know, the big company, they dictate how these hogs are raised using this lagoon and spray system that's obviously outdated and should have been discarded decades ago.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for wrestling with that. Corban, I just love to hear. So the people that you're interviewing, did it give you a different sense of their story to realize that the majority of people that you're dealing with in this narrative are minoritized people? How does that shape the way that you tell their story?
Yeah, I mean, I was privileged to sit in on the first day of the 5th federal trial, and I was not only captivated by Mike Keskey's performance in front of the jury, and by Mona's winsomeness and her team's unique cohesion. I mean, they felt like a family, and in fact, some of them were family. But I also sat in the lunchroom and got to talk to some of the plaintiffs, including Lendora Farland, who was supposed to be here today. And Lendora is a bubbly personality, magnetic. I mean, immediately you love her. And just sitting next to her and hearing her family story, it immediately struck me. I mean, I had spoken to Mona previously, but it was one thing to speak to Mona, in the abstract, another to sit next to Lendora and listen to it personally. I realized this really was a civil rights story. It was kind of an untold civil rights story. And that captivated me. I mean, all of my books have been about issues of injustice and human rights around the world. And here was an issue of injustice, a civil rights story that was literally lurking in my backyard without me having any idea about it. So, I mean, that it captured my heart out of the gate. I really wanted to tell this story. But I also knew, as being white, coming from a middle-class background, that it was going to require me to spend a lot of time down east, and really, as I do with all of my stories, go to learn, go with open hands, a desire to embody, the stories that people share, and to honor them. And so it really was such a privilege to get to know these folks, to be able to carry their stories into the page. And then to see, and a number of them were able to come to the launch event that we had in Raleigh. I got to see, Lendora and a couple of others there. And it was just beautiful to be able to kind of celebrate the release of the story with the folks who were so important in bringing it to life.
Well, that's absolutely amazing, and I'm grateful that you were able to do that, to bring the story to light, and just calling it a civil rights story that's untold. Do you think this would have happened had the people in the area been largely white and well-to-do? Would this situation have happened, Mona?
Absolutely not. In fact, these people had been trying for years, decades, to get someone to represent them, and it was very difficult for us, and we were 4 hours away. We had, a lot of intimidation. The clients were intimidated. That went on, but we had the 5 federal trials, and the jurors did rule for us on it being unreasonable. Interference with the use and enjoyment of the property. Smithville then appealed to the federal court, the appellate court in Richmond, Virginia, where, by the way, I sat beside Elsie Hare in Pride. It was just a few of us there. Corban was there. He's an incredible writer. And so I encourage everyone to read the book. But there were the 3 federal judges. They were, in my opinion, very conservative. But you asked the question, would it have happened if the circumstances had been different? And there is a 3-minute clip that I would like to play, because while we did not win all of the appeal, we won on most of the issues, but the senior federal judge, Judge Harvey Wilkinson, when Smithville's lawyer was arguing, he interrupted him, and he spoke on the very question you just asked. So, Linda, see if you can play it. By the way, now we're seeing the pictures. Go ahead.
What, and I'll just speak in a general matter of what troubled me. And when you look at the complaint and you look at the trial, the hog farming here, it certainly provides many jobs in Eastern North Carolina. And I understand that, and it's very important to the economy of the eastern part of the state. And that's surely true, and it is important, not only that, but to our national food supply. But it's harmful to the people who live nearby. You look at the amicus briefs, look at the complaint, it's got to be environmentally harmful to the waterways and seeping into the water. Nobody wants another Flint, Michigan tragedy down the road. And this can't be good for children's respiratory systems. Just these odors, talking about wheezing and headaches and things like that. And the inhumanity to the animals and the fatality rate among the hogs, I suppose they're just animals, and maybe some people think they're ugly and treat them the way we want. But I just kept reading this case, and I'm thinking to myself, if this were my property, I would be outraged at some of these conditions that were allowed to persist. And I think, our less fortunate fellow citizens, they have property rights too. And many of the homes surrounding an operation of this sort, they don't go for a high price, but the people that live in them, they have a right to good health. They have a right to their enjoyment of their property.
If I could respond to 2 things.
And I thought if this were some McMansions surrounding these hog farming operations, if these were the houses of the affluent, wouldn't those conditions, if these were more politically powerful, wouldn't those conditions have been cleared up sooner rather than later? And that is my problem.
That is remarkable testimony, and I guess you made the point for you, Mona. That really did.
That was
yeah.
the federal judge, one of the most highly respected conservative in this country.
Mhm.
And as he said that, our clients, they wanted to be believed, and they wanted to be heard, and they wanted the conditions to change. They've never been opposed to the capos remaining where they are, and they certainly didn't want to affect their friends or jobs or anything like that. But they wanted to be able simply to use and enjoy their property. And I have children and grandchildren like the rest of us do. So that's really why our heart and soul was so much in this case and representing them. And Corban, I think you did capture that in your story.
Yeah, it was a remarkable moment. I mean, I was sitting there behind Mona and Elsie, and I mean, right before the judges came on, Mike Keskey made a wisecrack. He said, I feel like one of those hogs going into the slaughterhouse. And then, you know, Judge Wilkinson stopped everything, you know, blew the barn doors off, and left it, frankly, all of us in tears. I mean, it was really a striking moment. You know, justice doesn't always come to the courthouse, but it did that day.
Amen. I'm so grateful that you were able to make the compelling argument that you did, to bring the people with you, to share those stories and those slides that really made it clear. And then Corban, to bring this even further in this wonderful text, Wastelands, which I encourage you all to go out and get a copy today. You will not regret that, and you will find that he's not just a brilliant lawyer in his background, but also a wonderful storyteller. The way that you tell technical details in a way that's engaging is quite remarkable.